Hey everybody, it's Dr. Jonathan again with another live 12 at 12, and I'm here in Colorado at the Union Reservoir. Now I want to film this right beside the water, but you know there's a lot of people there and we're trying to give each other lots of space and social distance, so we're going to move away, but I thought it'd be cool to do this today from near the water anyway. Of course, now all you're seeing is cars, but we are clearly in a moment, at least in the United States, although I'm sure this is true in many other countries today as well, where there's just a great feeling of imbalance. Obviously, that's an understatement when you look at some of the riots and racial tension and police violence that are going on. But to talk about imbalance is really not a small thing. It's not minimizing what's going on. In fact, what it's really about is recognizing that our planet and our human community are all subject to the same rules of life. That as much as we may want to, I see you out there, guys. Hey, Chris, Carrie. As much as we may want to think that we are separate from the natural world and the laws that govern trees and grasses and lakes and stars, we're not. And what we see in nature is that any system that is out of balance, which means not enough diversity, not enough creative dynamism, a resistance to the quick cycles of creation and destruction, all those behaviors, those very human behaviors, create imbalance. On the other hand, what we see in nature is the openness to cycles, the absolute need to share energy and power. You see that everywhere. You see that everywhere. Every part of a natural system, whether it's the grasslands of Africa, whether it's the forests of North America, whether it's the coral reefs of the tropics, there's a constant interchange of energy and power, and there can't be dominance, because if there's dominance of one, everyone suffers. If the coral reefs are overgrazed, if the forests are depleted of predators, and so on, we find that nature can't sustain. That there will be a more dramatic crisis. There will be a kind of violent change and even the decay or collapse of a system. However, where we learn that diversity promotes health, where we learn that power must be moved and shared and processed and re-examined and moved and shared, when we abide by these basic natural rules and laws, we find that human communities prosper. Now, what we're seeing in the world right now, of course, and I'm exaggerating when I say the world, because I don't know particularly what it's like where your ancestors are from, but we're definitely seeing growing tension between polarities, haves and have-nots, differences of race, differences of political power, and of course, in the United States right now, we are seeing this in the extremes. And it must be understood when you look at the chaos that's ensuing and the way protests have turned into riots, or the way protests have turned into something harder to understand. Just seems like the explosion of rage and comments, for that matter, that we see in the media, that now this is no longer about George Floyd. Well, of course, that's a ridiculous comment, because when any part of a system has been kept out of balance, or when any system has been out of balance for long enough, you will see a very simple equation take place, which is that degree of imbalance will be expressed as energy in the process of correction. And that means for hundreds of years of slavery and segregation and systematic oppression, then sure, it's going to be activated by the killing you may have heard of the killing of the woman Briona. I forget her last name right now, but she was an EMT murdered in her sleep by the police who forcibly entered her apartment, and it turned out to be the wrong apartment. They were looking for someone else. And of course, because it seemed reasonable to execute someone in their bed, they essentially killed the wrong person. And the only distinguishing feature was that she was black. When this kind of stuff is going on, then you have to understand that there is a buildup of imbalanced energy, and of course it's going to come out as rioting, looting, violence. And when people say they can't relate to that, then I'm inviting you to take some time and think about the way that nature works to correct herself. When we follow the natural laws in our lives, our societies, and our world, the corrections tend to be smaller because they're constant. Again, sharing power, constant. Who is in power, changing. The dominance of different species, not only in different ages, and they all take turns, but even in different times of day. You sit in a forest long enough and you'll see there is the time for the blue jays, and then they go. There's the time for the grasshoppers, and then they go. There's a time for larger mammals, and the deers come and graze, and then they go. There's the time for the predators, the raptors. My point being is that in a natural system, everyone gets the time and energy they need so that everyone can contribute their aspect of the system for the good of the whole. And this is really the kind of awakening that we are in the middle of right now. We are seeing a dramatic time of correction of consciousness. We are seeing literally the expression of energy through rage, violence, pain, fires. And if we want to be part of an evolving world, an evolving community, and an evolving consciousness in our own lives, then in some ways we really have to stay open and compassionate and curious as we see these things that scare us, as we see these things we don't understand, as we see these things that we just wish weren't happening so that we could all return to our comfort. But these things are happening because when some of us are comfortable, some of us are not. And so we are now facing some difficult decisions as communities, families, individuals, and societies. What are we willing to sacrifice or compromise, give up, so that more people can have less extremes of oppression, violence, poverty? What are we willing to give up in our own comfort so that we might use our own power and privilege to help right the balance in the system? And can we examine the ways that we ourselves fall prey, you might say, to our own imbalances under the illusion of comfort? To always have things the way we like them, to always spend money the way we want to always think of ourselves first and what we could be doing with our time, money, or energy otherwise. Now, these are difficult questions, and I'm not telling you what to think, but I'm encouraging you to explore your beliefs, your perspectives, and how you're understanding the crisis that we're seeing in the world. When you look, for example, at the division that is emerging from the COVID restraints and recommendations, do you see a mask as an impingement on your freedom, or do you see it as an expression of your freedom to choose something that you may not need but could actually save someone else's life, or even just show a little respect to the people that feel it's important? These are complex questions because they demand that we think like nature. We think in systems. We think in terms of balance. We think in terms of sharing, exchanging energy, and most interestingly, we stay curious and creative. That is one thing that nature always is, creative. If there's a way for grass to grow in the narrow cracks of a sidewalk, it will. If this tree here can't quite find its reach because another tree is leaning into it, it may very well go a different direction than it had planned, right? But you see, these things don't follow goals that are outside themselves. In nature, life follows its truest impulse. And that's a great lesson for us. When we create balance in the world, in our home, and by balance, remember, I mean holding all sides, honoring diversity, and not seeking the kind of monoculture of our own comfort, then the natural impulse of who and what we are can arise. Because we're not busy in the consciousness of control, fear, resistance. As Chris Webster just posted, resilience, adaptability, life source. Love it, Chris. It's true. What we see from nature is absolute resilience. And what we see in the human community is clinging and controlling. And the cost is the balance swings so strong that eventually the correction is devastating and sometimes violent. Now we're going to come to an end in just a moment here, but I want you to consider how the things I'm talking about today might sound like they're all about nature. They might sound like they're all about the George Floyd inspired racial tension and demonstrations, but it's about so much more than that. It's about asking ourselves, what is a sustainable system for our world to come? What is the kind of world we want to live in? And more significantly for the moment, how do you see these very principles in your own home, your own house, your own relationships? Are you willing to be generous with your energy, power, and resources? Are you willing to be curious, adaptable? Are you willing to listen deeply to the voices in your intimate life? And that could just be your kids, your neighbors, maybe even your pet, your friends. Ultimately, the path that we're talking about here is one in which we see life as implicitly wise and loving if only we learn to find balance within it and open our hearts and minds to what we see and learn along the way. The final thing I wanted to share as we get ready to close for today's 12 at 12 is a little exercise you might consider at home, which is to think of the 4 elements of life: earth, air, fire, water. Earth, air, fire, water. Think of them metaphorically as energies in your life. Fire can be like passion or rage. Water can be like emotion or smoothness, coolness. Earth can be groundedness, and air can be like vision, dreaming, something more free and flowing. And the question to ask yourself today is, which of these elements am I leaning too far into, too dependent on, too desirous of, and which of these do I need more of? So, we've been looking at the fires of life and what's going on in the world, so we came to the water today. And that could be an example. Have a bath, watch images of water, do meditations and picture water. Or maybe it's been a lot of emotion for you, a lot of quietness, a lot of smoothness, and you need some fire. Get out into the sun, get on the internet and see what's going on in the world. Get some fire into you. Maybe it's too much swinging and what you really need is balance. Take off those shoes and find some safe ground to put your feet down into. Or maybe you've just been too grounded and it's time to get a big vista somewhere, or lay on the ground and watch the clouds go by. So the idea is to use the 4 natural elements of life to actually help you balance the natural elements in yourself. Well, I guess our time's up for now. I actually do love doing these things on the road and live. I'm sorry I couldn't stay by the water for you to see it all, but we're trying to practice our compassionate distancing, which is what I call it. And it's just about being kind. It's not about anything political or oppressive, as far as I'm concerned. And so I'm over here in the grass, but if you can look through the cars, you're gonna see right over there is the beautiful Union Reservoir. And I hope you can take some time today in the middle of all the chaos of life and ask yourself what kind of balance you need to restore so you can be a part of the greater system and the restoration of balance that is needed for one and all. All right, I love you, and I'll see you later.